What's next for Sean Strickland is the question on a lot of people's minds. Now, he has just fought against Dricus du Plessis and unfortunately lost his fight against Dricus. So what's next? That's the question I have today and the one that I hopefully can answer for you guys. Now, I do believe that if Sean Strickland wants another chance at gold, he is going to have to evolve and change a few things in his game. So I want to go over those things. And when I say evolve, by the way, I don't mean change his whole style. His style is what got him to where he is now. It's just a few tweaks that I think he could do to give him a better chance when he fights next. So I think in the Dricus du Plessis fight, although I do believe he won, it was a close fight. And I think that if he had done these two things I say now, he definitely would have stood more of a chance. And the first thing I have is go forwards more. Now, I think he did this exceptionally well against Israel Adesanya. And for me, I think the title nerves got to him. Now, we all know that nerves can make or break a man. And in this instance, I do believe that the nerves got to him and broke him a little bit. After rewatching the fight a couple of times, it was very, very obvious that he was being pushed back for the entirety of the fight. And he was the one moving backwards, as I said before, but he was the one who wasn't in control in terms of where the fight was taking place. And du Plessis was the man who was pushing forward. He was the aggressor in this situation. And as we all know, judges look at who the aggressor is, who is controlling the fight, who is initiating the action, and that was du Plessis. Now, against Adesanya, it was the opposite, so I want to see him go back to that style. I want to see him using his amazing jab to push his opponents backwards, and then when they have their back to the cage, letting go and throwing some of those other punches. He can unload his hooks, he can unload his uppercuts, overhands, he can unload his straights, he can unload all those really, really high damaging shots once his opponent has nowhere to escape. And the second thing I really wish we saw in this fight, the urgency. The urgency. And I know he's a counterpuncher, he's a very defensive fighter, but for me, he needed to be more urgent. And I think he needs to be more urgent in his fights. Now, I don't mean let everything go in the first round, get gassed out, and then get finished. What I mean is pick and choose the right times to be aggressive, to push forward, to win the round. And I know this is hard for a fighter who's mid-fight to be defending himself and be throwing strikes and then also have in his mind, shall I be urgent now? Shall I not be urgent now? So I think this one sort of goes to his whole team. As a team, they need to have a way of telling him when he needs to put his foot on the gas or some sort of communication technique that they can use. And those are the two things I really want to see in this next fight that he has against whoever that may be. But we need to now discuss who may be his next opponent and who I think his next opponent should be. As far as who I want him to fight in the next fight, of course, the ideal scenario would be a rematch. Why? Because it was a very close fight. So does it warrant a rematch? Yes, but Dana White has told us he doesn't want to do the rematch. If Sean Strickland wants to convince Dana White that the rematch should happen, we need to look at the organization of the UFC as a whole. People have this idea that it's the best fighters against the best fighters. It's if you're this rank, you fight 3 ranks up and you move up. And there's one thing, and I've said this before, and I've heard Chael Sonnen say it a lot, and it's so true. There's one thing that eliminates all rankings, that eliminates skill, that gets you fights no matter where you're ranked, and that is story. Funnily enough, the UFC works on a story basis. If you have enough of a why, enough of a story, the UFC will put the fight together. Why? Because it will sell. People watching the UFC want a story. If there is no reason for a fight, then 90% of the time, most people aren't watching, right? Why is Alex Pereira a champ? Because there was a story. There was a story between him and Adesanya, and they fast-tracked him so that he could fight him. Why was DC versus John Jones such a good rivalry? Not because of the skill, because of the story. There was animosity, there was a rivalry. They would clash heads. That's why people tuned in. And for Sean Strickland to get the rematch against Dricus du Plessis, he's going to have to create a big enough why a story that the UFC can run with, that the fans will go, do you know what? That's true. He should be fighting him. That's what he needs to do. So he needs to kick up a fuss on social media. He needs to be saying things every 5 seconds. I beat du Plessis. He didn't beat me. All the fans thought I won. Give me the rematch. He needs to go crazy when it comes to creating a why. That is the only viable way that this fight would occur. So if Sean Strickland created enough of a story that the UFC would be forced to put it on, they'd have to put it on. Now, who is my second opponent? Who do I think would be a viable opponent? And that for me is Khamzat Chimaev, right? He has called out everyone and anyone. I'm pretty sure he has called out Alex Pereira. He's called out du Plessis. This guy calls out everyone. And I think a fight between Sean Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev would be interesting. They have both trained together, so they both know how one another fights. And it would be very, very interesting to see how they fare against each other. I would see this as a fight in which the winner goes for the belt. And for me, I think Khamzat definitely needs one more fight before he goes for a belt. He hasn't fought a crazy amount of good fighters. Sean Strickland is definitely a good fighter. That would be my first reason. And secondly, if Khamzat is as good as the UFC think he is, it would do him well to fight someone and beat them convincingly. For me, that Usman fight was close. Very, very close. And he gassed out quickly. And I'm not sure that that has brought him much confidence, that fight. And so if he is as good as they say he is, and he fights Sean Strickland and he beats him convincingly, then we will see a much more confident Khamzat, a Khamzat who is fully prepared to go for a belt. And if Sean wins, he's put himself in an amazing position. He has just taken out the UFC Golden Boy. And that for me would be enough for Sean to go for a title fight again. So Khamzat Chimaev would be my ideal opponent. And finally, for me, Jared Cannonier. And why do I say this? Well, I said before, the UFC operates on a story basis. It is facts. And they fought before. And it was a narrow victory for Jared Cannonier, right? Some called it a robbery. Again, pretty similar to the du Plessis fight, and some people thought it was fair. There's a story there. A narrow fight, a narrow victory for Jared Cannonier. They could run with that. Again, as I said before, this goes back to story. We have a good story, it will sell. If they start arguing, if they start putting stuff on social media, if they start calling each other names, it'll be a pretty big fight. And then again, Sean Strickland wins. He's fought a very good opponent, beats him. That's enough for a title shot, in my opinion. If Jared Cannonier wins, he's in a very good position. And I think that would be a good fight. So the Khamzat Chimaev or Jared Cannonier are definitely more realistic options. The rematch would only happen if Sean Strickland created enough of a why, a story, for the UFC to have to put that fight on to force them. But let me know, who would you like to see Sean Strickland fight next? And it doesn't have to be the names I've mentioned. If you have other options, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.